All right, Alexander, let's talk about the meeting with North Korea and Russia. Kim and Putin set to meet. And the US says that this meeting is about Russia begging North Korea for weapons and ammunition because Russia's running out of weapons and they need North Korea to provide weapons for conflict in Ukraine. And the other narrative, which you've talked about, I've also mentioned, is that perhaps this is not so much about what North Korea can give Russia, but maybe this is about what Russia can give North Korea. I think that's what's really going on here. Anyway, what are your thoughts with this?
Absolutely, that's exactly what I think. I think people are getting this completely the wrong way round. I think that what's now happened is that with the breakdown in relations between Russia and the West, the Russians are now mending their fences with all their former friends. They've been making big moves to develop their relations with Cuba. We've talked about that in programs. I mean, there's been again, on spat, there's been talk about, human trafficking rings trying to get Cubans to fight in the special military operation. Nobody should get worked up about this. This is not having any underlying effect on Russian-Cuban relations. But the Russians are now looking for an increasingly powerful ally, one that gives them leverage in the North Pacific, one that gives them leverage over the United States, one that potentially gives them a great deal of leverage over South Korea, which has been drifting away from Russia. It previously had a good relationship with Russia, but it has, over the period of the existing presidency in South Korea, moved towards the United States and provided the United States and, by the way, Ukraine, as everybody knows, with 155 millimeter shells. Anyway, these relationships, these other countries, it gives the Russians, by improving their relations with North Korea, leverage over these countries, over Japan, over South Korea, to some extent, by the way, even China, because the Chinese have, become accustomed to thinking of North Korea as their ally, unconditional ally, but the Russians are strengthening their relationship with North Korea, and they're coming to North Korea. The priority, I think, will be less military cooperation, which I think people are making too much about, and more economic cooperation. They're going to try and develop that relationship again, a fact which most people don't realize was actually very close indeed during the Cold War. Like many people, most people, I'd assumed that North Korea during the Cold War had preserved some kind of equidistance between China and the Soviet Union. As we've gradually learnt more about what was really going on in North Korea at that time, it's become increasingly clear that North Korea was much, much more tightly integrated into the Soviet economic system than anybody knew, and that it was providing the Soviets with all kinds of valuable minerals and all kinds of things of that kind, and even subcomponents for Soviet factories. And the Soviets, in turn, were obviously providing a great deal of economic support to North Korea. So that relationship is going to be revived.
Yeah, and why shouldn't it be? I mean,
Why shouldn't it be?
this is, the sanctioned countries teaming up together. I mean, it makes sense. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, most of all to the U.S. State Department. I mean, all the countries that have been sanctioned and that are being sanctioned are going to obviously work together. And you're getting more and more countries on the sanctions list working together. I mean, this is expected.
This is exactly right. This is exactly what's going to happen. So we see that Russia has now developed strong relations with Iran. It's developing strong relations with North Korea. And of course, as we discussed, it's also got rapidly improving and developing relations with Cuba as well. So that's what's happened. And of course, it's exactly as one might have predicted. The United States previously was trying to keep all of these countries divided from each other, and now what it's seeing is that they're all coming together. And, well, why should that surprise anyone?
Well, if the U.S. wants to stop this cooperation, the obvious move is to remove sanctions on one or all of these countries. I mean, but they can't do that. That's the obvious fix to this dilemma of Russia working with North Korea and Iran working with Russia and Venezuela working with Russia and Iran working with Venezuela. I mean, the way to stop this is to stop sanctioning everybody, because they've gone sanction crazy, as has the EU now. The EU has now, they've completely gone sanctions nuts, and to start rolling back some of the sanctions.
Yes, I completely agree. But I mean, they're not going to do that. They're going to double and triple and quadruple down. They're already threatening North Korea. They're saying if North Korea provides shells to Russia for use in the special military operation, the United States will impose more sanctions on North Korea. What kind of sanctions can they impose on North Korea that they haven't already imposed? I mean, the thing is becoming ridiculous. I mean, it's becoming stupid. But there are lots of... North Korea is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world. The sanctions are now on North Korea are collapsing. The Russians will go through the motions of maintaining the sanctions, but because some of them are UN sanctions. But the reality is that they will find ways around them. So they will supply North Korea with fertilizer to get its agriculture back. They will provide North Korea with food. They will probably provide North Korea with energy. Maybe they will open up gas pipelines that will help the North Koreans with their railway system. They will do all of these things. And sooner or later, they will come to the South Koreans, with whom they have a long-standing relationship as well, one which I doubt the South Koreans will want to walk away from entirely, and they will say, well, look, we've now got this strong, good relationship with North Korea. Why don't you do that which we have been discussing with you for so long, which is agree to have those gas pipelines we're building to North Korea extended to South Korea as well. And that will be a dramatic change in the geopolitical architecture. But that's I'm sure, what the Russians are going to do. They're going to re-establish their relationship with North Korea, and they're going to build it up, and they will move forward. People, the Russians have always maintained a good relationship with North Korea, even during the time when China, not so long ago, had a tense relationship with North Korea over North Korea's nuclear program. The Russians at that time, I remember Putin, for example, saying, let's remember North Korea is a state. It's one that has to be taken seriously. It's one whose interests need to be respected. The Russians went out of their way to be more polite about North Korea than almost anyone else was. So, of course, the North Koreans are reciprocating. And notice that it's Kim Jong Un who's going to Vladivostok to meet Putin. Putin, of course, has been to North Korea. It was one of the very first countries he visited shortly after he became Russia's president.
Yeah. Why can't Russia work to remove the UN sanctions? Is that even possible? And Trump, he tried to mend things with North Korea, and then
he did,
and the neocons got in the way.
He absolutely
anyway, what are your thoughts?
Well, all right. I mean, on the first point, I'm assuming, I don't know the facts, but I'm assuming that in order to lift the sanctions, there would need to be a vote in the UN Security Council. And of course, the Americans and the French and the British would veto such a vote if it ever came up. So I think that's the initial problem with lifting those sanctions, formally lifting those sanctions. But you can make sanctions a dead letter. And that's what's going to happen now. As for Trump, you're absolutely right. He made a serious effort to try to develop relations with Kim Jong Un, to try to normalize the relationship with North Korea. The North Koreans were very interested. Kim Jong Un came to Singapore to meet Trump. He came also to Hanoi to meet Trump. And far from getting behind him, the entire American political class undermined what Trump was doing, and John Bolton sabotaged it, launching even raids on North Korean embassies and things of that kind. And of course, what is happening instead is that instead of meeting with Trump and developing relations with the United States, well, Kim Jong Un is now meeting Putin and is going to develop relations with Moscow. And ultimately, of course, with China as well, because one thing one should say clearly is that everything that Putin and Kim Jong Un are going to talk about now, the Russians are going to report to Xi Jinping. And I mean, it's inconceivable that the Chinese will not be fully briefed about all of these discussions and won't be invited to give the green light to them.
Yeah. All right. Interesting how things work out. Anyway, the Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, Telegram, and X. And go to the Duran shop. Use the code GOODDAY, get 10% off. Take care.